Hi, I'm Femi OK, and you are in the stream. Today, Barack Obama is the first US president to visit a federal prison. Now, he did it to promote his reform plan for the country's criminal justice system. So, what will it take to make that reform happen? Now, today is not the first time on the stream we've talked about prisons. This time, interesting though, because we're talking about, well, how do we fix a broken prison system? Malika, what do you have?
Right, well, most of the conversation online is a reaction to President Obama's visit to the federal prison. You can see the tweet from the White House itself here on my screen. A lot of positive reactions, but from the stream community, we got this comment from Kai, who says, it's a good short-term fix, but there does need to be long-term change. So, of course, it is a very big conversation. We can't have a conversation at all, though, without you. You can tweet us your comments with hashtag AJStream.
And with us in our studio today, we have Matt Haney. He's policy director and co-founder of Cut 50. That's a national bipartisan initiative working to cut the US prisoner population in half over the next 10 years. Matt, it's good to have you here.
Great to be here.
Very ambitious. We're going to be talking to you and our other guests in just a moment, so sit tight.
My name is Kirk Bloodsworth. I'm the first death row inmate to be exonerated in the United States by DNA. I'm the advocacy director of Witness to Innocence, and I'm in the stream.
President Barack Obama described the US criminal justice system as broken recently. Now, he says the time has come to do something about it. So just how broken is the system? Let's take a look at some of the numbers shared by the White House. We are going to start with 2.2 million. That's the total number of prisoners in the US, which has quadrupled since 1980. That's despite an overall decline in the crime rates over the last 3 decades. And even though the US makes up only 5% of the world's population, they house a quarter of all the prisoners around the world. Next figure, 60%. That's the share of US prisoners who are either African American or Latino. And how much does all this cost? $80 billion. That's the amount the US spends each year to keep people incarcerated. Finally, 77% of all of those who leave prison are rearrested within 5 years of their release. So why is President Obama making this priority right now? Here's part of what he said during his prison tour.
You know, I think we have a tendency sometimes to almost take for granted or think it's normal that so many young people end up in our criminal justice system. It's not normal. It's not what happens in other countries. What is normal is teenagers doing stupid things. What is normal is young people making mistakes. And we've got to be able to distinguish between dangerous individuals who need to be incapacitated and incarcerated versus young people who are in an environment in which they are adapting, but if given different opportunities, a different vision of life, could be thriving the way we are.
To help us talk about President Obama's mission to reform the US criminal justice system, we're also joined by Anthony Graves. He spent 18.5 years in prison for a wrongful conviction. 12 of those years were in solitary confinement. He's currently a member of the Houston Forensic Science Center Board and a criminal justice reform advocate. Cecily McMillan is a prison rights advocate and Occupy Wall Street activist who back in 2012 served nearly 2 months in jail for allegedly assaulting a police officer. And Amaya is author of Locked Down, Locked Out, Why Prison Doesn't Work and How We Can Be Better. Good to have you all here, everybody. Cecily, very few of us get to have a little taste of prison. You spent almost 2 months in prison. What is the one memory that will always stay with you about how you were treated there?
One memory. I would say it was when my friend Judith was vomiting blood. As it turns out, there's a suit against medical malpractice, and all of us inmates were saying, listen, she's fine 2 days ago. She doesn't know where she is. She doesn't know the difference between the bathroom or the kitchen cabinet. There's something really wrong with her. And we kept yelling and yelling for the guard to call the doctor, and the guard finally called the doctor, and the doctors came up, and we told them that she's been vomiting blood for over an hour, and the doctors just laughed at us and said that this wasn't a medical emergency. And I mean, that just taps into the very basic top of the iceberg, why I said genocide a minute ago.
So in the pre-show, I asked Cecily, if you could describe prison in America, how would you describe it? And Cecily, you said what?
Said genocide. I mean, I think that for one, it's very clear that it's mostly black and brown men. That's for two. If you're in jail, you're probably poor, if not definitely poor. People that have money manage to get out of jail, at least on bail. And the fact that it's 77% returning. I live every day of my life, and for the next 4 years, I'll live every day of my life on probation, terrified of anything, of anybody thinking I did anything wrong, of even driving. I mean, it's genocidal because it's going after specifically people of color, poor people, and ultimately it's death of the soul. You don't have a life after you've been convicted. You're just waiting to go back in.
Matt, I saw you nodding as Cecily was speaking. Why were you agreeing with her?
I was resonating with her story and her experience. I think that prison and jail exists to hurt people and hurt communities, especially black and brown individuals and communities, poor people in this country. And whether you call it broken or just fundamentally flawed at every single level in terms of its purpose, its goals, its structure, its funding, it needs to change. 2.2, some say 2.3 million people in prison in this country, 65 million people who have a criminal record, millions of young children who are growing up without their family members who are locked up. This is wrong, and it's hurting people, it's destroying lives, and it is in need of a change at every single level.
Well, Anthony, among the host of problems that people online say happen and things that are wrong inside prisons, this is one perspective from Nazmul on Twitter, and she says it's a lack of professionalism. She says there's also other things, but picking up on that lack of professionalism, she says we're outsourcing prison services like food and health, etc. Is that something that resonates with you, that lack of professionalism?
Yeah, and she's really touching on something that maybe she don't know how profound that is that when you talk about lack of professionalism, I always think about the officers that are working there. And I think about these kids that are coming out of high school, 18 and 19 years old, that are put in these roles to have authority over these men's lives. And just to correct you, I like to go back and say that I spent 16 years inside Texas confinement. 12 of those years was on Texas death row. Wow. I was on death row. I had 2 execution dates for a crime I knew absolutely nothing about. But yeah, the lack of professionalism is a big problem. There is no sensitivity training when it comes to the officers. So the officers coming in, they have complete authority over these guys, and the system backs them up. So if they're wrong, you won't know about it because the officers, it's like they protect each other. So that officer violates that man's right day in and day out. But on the paper, they're gonna make it and look as though that inmate created a problem.
Could you give us a clear example of what you mean by lack of professionalism? Give us a clear example. Cecily gave us a very vivid memory that she had from just 2 months in prison. Give us an idea of what you mean, Anthony, by lack of professionalism. Just one story.
When I talk about lack of professionalism, for example, my neighbor it was his time to go to rec, and we get 1 hour rec a day because we was in solitary confinement. So, you most of the people they want 1 hour. And this female officer, she wasn't no more than about 19, 20 years old. And you can tell she didn't want to do her job that day. So when it came time for him to get ready to go to rec, when she was next, she walked by him. And he said to her, ma'am, I thought I'm next to go to rec. And she said, oh, no, you VR at your rec, which means you verbally refuse. And he said, no, I didn't have a VR on my rec. I'm sitting here waiting to go to rec. And she said, no, you VR at your rec. And she kept going on. So he said, well, look, can I talk to a rank officer because this is not fair. I want my rec. And so she said, okay. She went and got the ranking officer. The ranking officer came down there, took her aside. And he got a little upset, and he said, well, then I'm not letting you shut this door until you get me the warden down there. So they decided that he now was disobeying the order, and then they rushed in on him, beat him down, pepper sprayed him, took him out and put him in another what they call a management cell, simply because she did not want to do her job. You know, that's what I'm talking about when I say lack of professionalism.
Sure.
It leads to consequences for those who are back there.
See, Maya, let me bring you into the conversation. There's obviously an issue with what's going on in prisons, but how are people getting loaded up and then put in prison? It's, if we go back to the sentencing as an issue, President Obama was saying, well, maybe young people should be given a second chance. Maybe some non-violent drug offenders shouldn't be sent to prison. Can you pick up on that idea? Do you think that might make a difference?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that Obama's reforms and the reforms that are being put forth in Congress right now are definitely a start. They would reduce the mandatory minimums that now are causing these long sentences for federal drug offenders, people incarcerated for 10, 20, 30, even life for small crimes, really, when you think about it. And so, yeah, I think it would be a step in the right direction. One of the problems that I see with this, and I think all of us here are talking about prison as mass incarceration, the way that prison has really taken this country by storm and particularly targeted communities of color, that large scope is not going to be addressed by this small, really limited reform that targets nonviolent, particularly drug offenders in federal prison. And actually, one of the ways that I've been disappointed in how Obama is talking about this is that he's drawing this really thick dividing line between nonviolent offenders and people who've been convicted of violent offenses, saying some people are just like me, some people have done stupid things and that's why they're incarcerated. And then there are these people over here and they deserve to be in prison and they deserve to be subject to this treatment. And it's troubling.
All right, so Cecily, you just raised your hand. Why did you raise your hand just as Maya was talking there?
I'm a violent felon. Like, I can't vote. I can't leave the state without permission. I get cavity searched still by probation officers. Like, this specifically would not address anything to do with my case. I mean, she's exactly right about this. And ultimately, I mean, we're not, okay, I am so happy that President Obama is taking a huge step forward to even acknowledge that people in prisons are people. I mean, that's huge. But ultimately, we're still talking incarceration. Well, we're still talking like punitive treatment. There is no mention of rehabilitation still. I mean, these people that are coming into these systems, as I wrote recently for Al Jazeera, are coming in already damaged. If you end up in prison, it's because you came from a fundamentally damaged place. Well, people who have money, people who have lawyers, people who have people that are looking out for them, ultimately don't end up in prison. And when you get there and you're not treating addiction, you're not treating PTSD, you're not treating the lack of being able to have access to a job, when you're being raped or sexually assaulted by doctors or guards or other inmates, when you're not being given psychiatric or therapeutic treatment, and then you're withstanding that for, like in Anthony's case, up to 16 years, he said, and then you're released. 18. I mean, 18 years.
So, Cecily, we get what you're saying. In fact, it's so much more complex than maybe we're looking after young offenders, and maybe if we take out drug offenders. Anthony, what did you want to add?
Well, what I mean, you know, you have to also take into account that most of the people today that are getting locked up, they're young people, and they're 16, they're 17, they're 18, and they haven't had any responsibility before they even go there. You know, and then you don't have what I like to call an exit strategy. What is in place? You're talking about cutting recidivism. You don't cut recidivism by cutting sentences down, because you just have more people doing shorter sentences. What you do is you put in an educational program and you provide tools so that when they come out, they can be productive. They can have half of a chance to succeed out here. You put, you allow them access to government programs such as education, such as housing, so that they can feel empowered to succeed out here. You don't When they come out, there's no programs out here for them to make this type of transition, to empower them, to even make them feel a part of society. They still out here operating as a criminal because they have the X on their back, which is what keeps recidivism rates up high, is because there are no programs out here that gives them breaks. So they end up going back because they're on probation. You can't get a job. You can't pay for probation. You can't pay for parole. You violate it, and you go back.
Guess,
So
give me a pause for a moment, because you're hitting a lot of the points that the community are also tweeting about. I can tell that by Malika's face as you're like checking all the boxes. What do you have for us?
Well, Anthony, you were talking about this exit strategy. We got this tweet here, and I'll direct this one to you, Matt. This is from Nazmul, who says, I'm interested in hearing successful ex-convict stories, and I don't think there are a lot of them. Anthony here is one example, but is there enough emphasis on this reform being put on success stories and how to have an exit strategy once you are released?
No, I like to say that I'm the exception and not the rule, because as guys that I see come out here, they deal with a lot of issues, and one of the issues is they can't find a job. They can't get counseling. You know, they have bouts of PTSD. They're going through issues that they come out with a lot of baggage on it, but there are no programs that are designed to help them make a successful transition. You have to address that as well, because until recidivism is cut down into the numbers that we're talking about, you can deal with. You have to put in some programs that allow them to make successful transitions out here, so they don't have to go back.
Right,
you know?
Matt. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Anthony. I think he's an example of a success story. There are countless success stories, but they've happened despite prison. I mean, prison makes it much harder for people. It destroys lives. It doesn't rebuild them. That's the way it's structured. And there are so many people behind bars who, if they were not there, could be doing extraordinary things for society, and many of them do when they come out. There are many stories like that aren't being told, but again, it's happening despite prison. Prison isn't helping people. People are having to overcome prison.
Yeah. I mean, when I think about this question, because the idea of a reentry program or the idea of a transitional program is important, but it also kind of keeps in place this assumption that these large number of people are going to prison and that prison can be rehabilitative. My sister went to prison 4 times. She's been incarcerated 4 times. Every time she came out, she was addicted to heroin. Every time she came out, she went back to using heroin within a very short time of coming out. Why? Not only because there were so few opportunities for her to do something else with her life, and there were so many barriers set up, but because prison had traumatized her. Prison had hurt her. So what we're doing, sending people to prison, is hurting people who have already been hurt, as Cecily said, and it's fueling this cycle. And so I think the #1 goal really needs to be getting people out.
I couldn't agree more. I like Maya. My brother's been in prison 4 times. This last time 6 years. He is an addict. He should have gone to rehabilitative programming. A. B. Children should not be in prisons. Period. They're children. Right. If they can't go to war, if they can't buy cigarettes, if they can't buy alcohol, if they can't sign their own legal economic forms, then they should not be in prison. Solve that one. And as far as like exit strategy, I have 2 degrees. I have 2 degrees from top 40 schools. I have 3 education certification. I am Jimmy Carter's great-grandson's former nanny. I can't work with kids anymore because I'm a violent nanny. None of my degrees are worth anything anymore. If it weren't for the nation offering to let me write a book for them, I would be possibly homeless right now.
Guess our online community want to be part of this conversation as well. Malika?
Well, Cecily, they're picking up on the point that you raised about kids should not be in prison. This is Lusuma, and she says she agrees with that, but in addition, she has another layer. She says Black kids in particular often don't have the right to have a childhood like their white counterparts. And so we're talking about reform here, Anthony, but there's this video comment picking up on that same thought. This is from William, so have a listen.
If real change is going to be made, it needs to address the fact that the prison system is working the way it was intended to work. It was intended to imprison lots of Black people and criminalize this population. So how do you reform something that's poisonous?
So Anthony, it's really powerful words there, but are we talking about the wrong thing when we talk about reform?
Yeah, when you're talking about reform, he's absolutely right, which is why I said at the initial outset is that the system that, no, it's not broken. It's designed to do exactly what it's doing. So we need to quit trying to, as I say, patch hole this thing up. We need a new system. We need to build a new system because this one just does not work.
Anthony,
and every time we try to fix
can I show you something?
Another leak spring. It's a broken system because it was designed to break other people. So I say that build another system and let's get away from this system that has failed us for centuries.
All right, guys, let me show you something. You can tell me whether it's helping towards reform or we're just patching here. So this is on my laptop, President Obama's proposal. So reducing mandatory minimum sentences, improve prison conditions, cutting back on solitary confinement, reduce recidivism, allow released felons to vote, invest in education, job training. Are we patching here or are we reforming here, Matt?
I think this is a step forward, as Maya said. It's only the beginning. There's so much more that needs to be done. I think all of those things that you just named would be positive steps, and but it shouldn't be the end by any measure. Right. Many of those reforms only address the federal system, which many the other guests noted is a small part of the overall system. But it's an important one because it's helping fuel this national conversation. It's also the system where we see some of the most egregious types of sentences fueled by the drug war. It's really the forefront of the drug war is the federal system. So there are some fundamental changes that need to be made in the federal system, but by all means it can't stop there. Hopefully it's the first domino that falls and we see a lot more transformation come out in the system.
See, I said your organization was ambitious because cutting the prison population by 50% in 10 years. How do you even go about doing that?
Well, I would like to think it's only the beginning as well. I think I agree with the guests in that I think that we need to change the way prisons look entirely. The concept of prisons as a gulag, really accomplishing the goals that it set out to of really disseminating communities needs to change, that whole structure. So I wouldn't be happy if there was a million people.
Differently. That's America thinking differently. Yeah. That's going to happen?
Yeah, well, I think that we're beginning to see that because of the work.
Say that more hopeful. Is that going to happen?
Well, it's only going to happen if we demand it happens, and if we organize. And the fact that the president came out and said what he did last week is less, in my opinion, with respect to him, a testament to his courage, but rather to all of the organizing that's happening in the streets, Black Lives Matter, all of the formerly incarcerated folks, families of incarcerated people who've spoken out and made it possible and demanded that he say it.
Yeah.
Maya, I see you nodding your head. So when we talk about can this happen, is this going to happen? I want to read you this tweet, not from the stream community, but from a prominent tweeter. This is Bree Newsome. She says, ways to reduce crime without adding more violent cops to the street is investing in education and creating jobs that pay living wages. Do you think that that is possible with the reforms that Obama has announced?
So this is actually one problem that I have with these reform proposals is that they are taking significant funds away from federal prisons, really positive, but then where are they redirecting them? They're redirecting them into local police departments. So much of this money would end up targeting poor communities of color. It would go into police departments that then would use the money for things like community policing, which often ends up meaning stop and frisk, which often ends up meaning arresting sex workers. And that's targeting predominantly Black and brown people in their communities on the street. And so I think that when we look at these reforms, we really have to look at them in a way that's not just yes or no.
Okay.
We have to say, what do we like about this reform and what could be different?
Maya Cheney, Cecily McMillan, Anthony Graves, and Matt Haney. We are taking you to the post show. 30 minutes goes really fast on the stream. Stream.aljazeera.com. To be continued. I'll see you online. Hopefully you can make it. Hello again, this is the Streams online post show. Glad we have one today, so much to talk about. Okay, so if we were trying to reform the prison system, then you're looking at the judicial system in the US and probably the police system as well. Matt, that's huge. How do you do all of that? And then get Americans to think differently?
I think you start to
I don't know why you don't have a head of grey hair, actually.
I think you have to hit it from all angles at the same time and start to get wins and to show that the system can change and that people should support it changing and build the movements and the power that make that possible. I think we have to start somewhere. We're supporting a bill which has been referenced, which is called the Safe Justice Act.
Right.
It's not a perfect bill. It doesn't do everything, but we want to pass this bill as a beginning to see many more bills passed. It would take a big chunk out of the mandatory minimums in the federal system, which I think folks have recognized are especially egregious. Half of the people who are locked up in the federal system are locked up for drug offenses. The war on drugs needs to be rolled back. The incarceration industry needs to be rolled back. And this would make a big step forward. And again, we think if we can pass a bill, that's a beginning to passing a lot more bills and to reshaping a narrative around what justice should look like in America to one that doesn't include prisons as we know them. Because prisons as we know them hurt people and don't help and don't rebuild lives, they destroy them.
Malika.
Picking up on that, this is from Cheney More. I want to read this tweet because it's interesting when we're talking about what would we want the future of prison to look like. He says, well, actually prison should be hell, but it should also be a rehabilitation center too. Remember, some prisoners aren't there for life. So Anthony, when you hear this tweet, you see this tweet, do you think that there's too much or just enough focus on punishment, prison as punishment?
Well, I just like to say that the same people that you feel should go through hell down there are the same people who are going to be returning to your neighborhood and your communities. So, you know, do you want monsters returning back to your neighborhood and communities, or do you want productive citizens? Right. So you have to answer that question before you decide whether you want punishment or you want them to be reformed. I mean, so understand, trust me, you can treat them like hell, which they do. And then you understand why recidivism is so high. Because they come back out and they have all the baggage that you put on them when they were down there. And then on top of that, they come and you still make it even harder then because you don't assist them with any government programs. You know, you make it, you treat them just like the criminals that you say they are when you sentence them down there. And then you say that, oh, well, he can't come out here and make it because for whatever reason. Well, it started behind prison bars when you decided to treat him like hell, instead of educating him and providing him with some tools to come out here and be productive. You know, that my grandmother always said, be careful what you ask for in this world because you'll get it. You know, and I say that when you're down there treating men like animals and then you release them back to society, what you get is that animal that you kind of created down there. So you would definitely want to be on the side of educating these guys and providing them with some tools so that they don't come out here and be a threat to your community and to your homes and to your children, instead of treating them like hell, breaking them, and they come out here and they can't function, and the next thing you know, they're doing something wrong to go back. You know, we have to ask ourselves what's best for us in society, to treat them like hell or to educate and reform them so they can be productive.
But let's also talk about people like me. I'm facing appeal. People like Anthony here who has been acquitted. People like Khalif Brower who's been acquitted. What most people don't seem to know about Rikers, for instance, is a large percentage of the population, the 12,000 people being held on this island. Of that, only a very small amount of these people, a small percentage of these people have actually been convicted of anything. They're awaiting trial. They haven't been convicted. And ultimately, they won't ever be convicted by a jury of their peers. Less than 5% of felony cases go to trial. I was incredibly lucky. And the reason why I went to trial is not because I ever had any idea that the system would be fair and I would have my day in court, but it was because I had to. I had to show, as a byproduct of who I am as an activist, how unfair that system is, all the way up to people who look like me but challenge the system. Ultimately, I went to 40 court dates where I sat in that courtroom for up to 8 hours waiting to be seen by a judge, and I was the only white female there over the course of 2.5 years. I saw 19-year-olds taking 13-year plea bargains for selling hits of acid. It's like, ultimately, there's no idea that you ever get a fair day in court.
when I talked to people in Rikers, I was the only person who had ever gone to trial. They don't even say go to trial. They say below trial. One big policy thing that could be useful for this process is I think we have a constitutional right to a speedy trial. I think we might need to redefine what exactly that means, because I met women waiting up to 7 years and still hadn't been convicted in Rikers. 7 years? Yeah. Khalif Browder. I mean, 3 years for allegedly stealing a freaking backpack, for God's sakes. Ultimately, so that's one. Two, maybe it would be helpful if these public defenders had to be present at the time of arrest. Like, cops could not speak to people until the lawyer was present. I mean, this is a very basic know your rights, point of agency. This has to do not only with color and racism, but also has to do with a matter of class, knowing your rights.
Right. So I'm just gonna add for our international audience, Rikers Island Correctional Facility is a very well-known prison in New York, or just north of New York City. Amaya, what did you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with Cecily. I would add to those 2 points, abolish monetary bail. We have a system in this country where we're incarcerating 750,000 people in county jails. The majority of those people haven't gone to trial. They're still under the presumption of innocence. And most of those people are incarcerated because they can't pay their way out.
Because they're poor.
Right, because they're poor. And we see that, for example, Black people have higher bail set for them. This is a process that could be reformed actually very easily by changing that fact that people have to pay their way out of jail, and people who have enough money do not have to sit there pre-trial.
Why do you think it is that America has the highest rate of incarceration in the world, Matt? What's going on with American psyche?
I think that incarceration in our society has been used as a tool. It's been used for profit, which has been brought up a number of times. There's been an incredibly coordinated campaign from both political parties of this tough on crime, lock them up, throw away the key type of politics where people have got elected and again on this type of rhetoric, disconnected it all from any type of solutions for community, fueled by the media. And there are many people and organizations and institutions that are responsible for it. So no one here is without any guilt from creating this system in terms of people in power. So to fix it or to change it is going to take a total transformation of what it is intended to do. Many other countries have models that we can look to where it isn't just a purely punishment, just hurt folks and targeted on certain communities. Racist in many ways our system is, but actually is intended to help people turn around their lives and support them and meet their needs. And so there are examples here. It doesn't have to be this way, but in America it is, and it has been for some time, particularly starting around 1980. From 1980 until now, you see the prison population double again, and double again. And so that's where that tremendous growth really started. And from looking back, we can not just think about what the system looked like before then, because we don't need to go back to it, but rather look around the world at systems that maybe work better and have a different set of values and a different set of goals that our system right now doesn't have.
Also, if I can, if I can
go ahead,
add
Anthony.
something to the conversation, I think one of the things that's missing, and that is a big problem, is we need more diversity in our district attorney's offices. You have to understand that there are almost 3,000 district attorneys across our nation, and 95% of them are white. 95% are white, and 61% of them are white males. Okay, that's one demographic group assessing sentencing on society, on our criminals. So you ask, okay, why is the numbers the way they are? Because you got one large demographic group assessing punishment. You say, well, prosecutors have a direct hand in sentencing because of this plea bargain type court we have going on. Hardly ever anyone goes to trial. They're plea bargain out. And who's giving these plea bargains? Prosecutors. And who are there? They're 95% white, 61% white male, a demographic group that has no understanding of, with no connection to the people that they prosecute daily. So that's a big problem. We need diversity in our district attorney's offices across our nation if we're really talking about seeking reform, because you're going to have to get someone in there who can identify with the people that they're assessing these punishments of.
Sure.
And right now, 95% of our prosecutors do not identify with the people that they're assessing punishment.
There's a lot on guests. There's a lot. Guests, hold tight for a moment because I've got to wrap up the show. But you've got a lot on your how to fix the prison system list. It's very impressive amongst all of you about what you've given us. Malika?
I will end with this from Dragon News Network, an interesting handle, but his points are salient. He says, we have to remember that once a person is broken, they must be rebuilt, and that's being failed to be acknowledged.
I asked you for a sentence at the beginning of our show in the pre-show. I'm going to ask you for a sentence at the end of the show. Now, Matt, I happen to know that you've been chatting to the president and the president's people, and you're helping him with this whole prison reform thing. If you could tell him one more thing, one critical thing in order to cut the prison population, what would it be?
Time is running out. This couldn't be more urgent. I hope that he does everything he possibly can in his short time remaining, not just to move policies forward, but to elevate this conversation, to create a new narrative that truly humanizes people who are being impacted negatively by the system.
So have you sat down and talked to him about this?
His staff regularly, and not him directly.
Right.
But you know, I hope that this is he hasn't been courageous on this issue, but last week he showed that maybe he has some time left, and there's more that he can do, and that he cares, and he wants to prioritize this in his final year and a half.
I made your sentence into a paragraph. I apologize about that. My fault. Maya, your sentence, if you could tell the President of the United States one more thing, one critical thing on his prison reform list, what would it be?
I would tell him that prison is destructive and it doesn't work. So much of the rhetoric that he's been putting forward has been about this small group of people, these people convicted of drug offenses, and he's saying, well, prison doesn't do anything for them and actually is harmful for them. I would argue it's harmful for everyone, and that includes all of us out here. It's collectively harmful, and we have to take that seriously if we're going to make real transformation.
Cecily, give me a sentence, otherwise we're going to crash off the internet. One sentence. Go ahead.
I think ultimately you've got to take children out of jails. You've got to take people with mental illness out of jail, and you've got to take people with drug addictions out of jail. Establish facilities that they need.
Anthony, you've got a one-on-one with the President of the United States. You have all of this experience, horrible experience. What would you tell him?
Well, I would tell him $80 billion a year with no education is a waste of $80 billion. You need education as an extra strategy to provide tools so these guys can feel empowered to come out here and succeed in life. That's how you cut your recidivism rate down, is by giving a positive exit strategy and put programs in place so these people can succeed. Until you do that, then all you're going to do is have some words changed on paper, but still the results are going to be the same. We need education in our prisons and not just these punitive measures.
Anthony, Matt, Cecily, Maya, the mark of a good conversation is that it could go on for another hour. I'm not allowed to make it go on for another hour, but I thank you for the 45 minutes that you gave us. Thanks for being part of the stream.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.